Be me, 24 years old male, working as a junior system administrator for a regional logistics company. Living at home with my mother because rent prices in this city are completely detached from reality. Honestly, it is not a bad setup since the house is large and my commute is short. My mother, whose name is Elena, is a saint of a woman, but perhaps a little too trusting for her own good. My father passed away about 5 years ago, so it is just the two of us in a four-bedroom suburban home. The silence in the house is sometimes heavy, but we manage to keep things cheerful. One evening over dinner, my mother drops a bomb on me. She says she wants to rent out the master suite on the ground floor to get some extra income. I am immediately skeptical because I watch too many true crime documentaries. I tell her we do not need the money, that bad and strangers are unpredictable. She insists that the house feels too empty and the extra cash would help with repairs. I realize she is lonely and probably wants another presence in the house besides her grumpy son. I agree on the condition that I get to vet the potential tenants alongside her. We put up an advertisement on a few local community boards and online forums. The first few applicants are absolute nightmares. One guy asked if he could set up a crypto mining rig in the garage. Another woman brought her three unleashed chihuahuas to the viewing and they peed on the rug. I was about to tell my mom to forget the whole idea when we got an email from a girl named Sienna. The email was polite and grammatically perfect and brief. She said she was a 22 years old female working remotely as a freelance editor. She came for a viewing on a Tuesday afternoon. I stayed home from work to make sure everything went smoothly. Sienna was small and quiet with dark hair that she kept tucked behind her ears. She wore a baggy sweater and avoided making direct eye contact for more than a second. My mom immediately went into full nurturing mode, offering her tea and cookies. Sienna declined politely and asked to see the room. She walked through the house like she was trying not to leave footprints. She looked at the bedroom and the attached private bathroom and nodded. She asked if the internet connection was stable and if the neighborhood was quiet. I told her the internet is gigabit fiber because I need it for work. She seemed relieved and said she would take the room. She filled out the paperwork right there and paid the deposit in cash. I ran a background check and everything came back clean. She moved in the following weekend. Her move was strange because she had almost no furniture, just a few suitcases and several heavy boxes of books and a computer setup. My mom tried to help her unpack, but Sienna gently insisted on doing it herself. She shut the door to her room, and that was effectively the last time we saw her for a week. At first I thought she was just settling in, or maybe she was jet-lagged, but as the days turned into weeks, a pattern emerged. Or rather, a lack of a pattern. Sienna was a ghost. I would leave for work at 7 in the morning and her door would be shut. I would come home at 5 in the evening and her door would be shut. My mom would cook dinner and knock on her door to offer her a plate. Sienna would open the door 2 inches, take the plate, whisper a thank you, and close it again. The next morning, the clean plate would be sitting on the kitchen counter. I never saw her use the kitchen or the living room or the backyard. It was like we had rented the room to avoid. My mom was worried. She kept saying that the poor girl must be lonely or depressed. I told mom to give her space and that some people are just introverts, but deep down I was starting to get weirded out too. I consider myself introverted, but this was on another level. I started paying closer attention to the sounds in the house. I realized that Sienna operated almost exclusively at night. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I would hear the floorboards creak very faintly. The refrigerator door would open and close with a soft thud. Sometimes I would hear the microwave run for 30 seconds, but she would stop it before it beeped. It became a strange obsession of mine to figure out her routine. One Friday night, I stayed up late gaming with some friends online. It was nearly 3 in the morning when I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I did not turn on the hallway lights because I know the layout by heart. I walked into the kitchen and froze. The refrigerator light was casting a pale blue glow across the room. Sienna was standing there in an oversized t-shirt holding a carton of orange juice. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. Her eyes went wide and she actually took a step back like she was afraid I would attack her. I raised my hands slowly to show I was not a threat. I said, "Hey, I am just getting water, do not mind me." She did not say a word. She quickly put the juice back on the shelf and practically ran back to her room. I heard the lock click shut a second later. I stood in the dark kitchen feeling like a jerk. I had clearly terrified her and I had no idea why. The next morning I told my mom about the encounter. Mom looked sad and said she hoped we were not making her feel unwelcome. I told her it seemed more like she was afraid of interaction in general. I decided to try a different approach. I am not good at emotional conversations, but I am good at solving problems. The problem was that our tenant was terrified of existing in the shared space. So I decided to make the space less hostile. I bought a small magnetic whiteboard and stuck it on the fridge. I wrote a note on it that said, "Feel free to use anything in the fridge, we buy too much food anyway." I also started leaving the hallway nightlight on so it was not pitch black at night. A few days passed and nothing changed. Then one morning I came down to make coffee and noticed something on the whiteboard. Underneath my messy handwriting was a small neat note in blue marker. It said, "Thank you." It was progress. I decided to push it a little further. My mom made a huge batch of lasagna that weekend. Usually she would knock on Sienna's door and try to hand it to her. This time, I told Mom to stop knocking. I said let us just leave a portion in a Tupperware container in the fridge with her name on it. That way she does not have to face us to get food. Mom was hesitant but agreed to try my strategy. I wrote on the whiteboard, "Lasagna in the blue container is for you, enjoy." The next morning the container was washed and drying on the rack. Next to the "thank you" on the board, she had drawn a tiny smiley face. I felt a ridiculous amount of satisfaction from that smiley face. Over the next month, this became our primary mode of communication. I would write updates about the house or just random thoughts. She would reply with short sentences or little drawings. I learned that she was actually very funny in a dry, sarcastic way. One time I wrote complaining about the weather being too hot. She drew a picture of a melting snowman saying, "At least you are not made of water." It was a weird dynamic communicating with someone I lived with but never saw. My mom was happy that Sienna was eating, but she still wanted to see her face. I told Mom to be patient and that trust takes time. I started to wonder what had happened to make her this way. Nobody hides in a room 24/7 unless they have a reason. One evening I came home early from work because I had a headache. It was around 3 in the afternoon. The house was usually empty at this time because Mom volunteered at the library. I walked in the front door and heard a noise from the living room. It was the sound of the television. I walked in quietly and saw Sienna sitting on the couch. She was curled up with a blanket watching a nature documentary. She looked peaceful and normal. Then the floorboard squeaked under my foot. She whipped her head around and the panic returned instantly. She scrambled to get up, tangling herself in the blanket. I held up my hand and said, "Wait, please do not run." I stayed where I was near the door to give her an exit route if she wanted it. I said, "I am sorry I came home early. I did not mean to startle you." She stood there clutching the blanket to her chest, breathing hard. I said, "You can finish your show. I will go to my room." She looked at me and for the first time she did not immediately bolt. She whispered, "It is okay, I was just leaving." Her voice was soft and shaky. I decided to take a risk. I said, "You know you pay rent for the whole house, not just your room. You are allowed to be here, Sienna." She looked down at the floor. She said, "I know, I just do not want to be a bother." I laughed gently and said, "You are the quietest person I have ever met. You could never be a bother." A tiny smile flickered on her face. She said I try my best. I asked her if she wanted a glass of water or anything. She shook her head and said no thank you. Then she slowly walked back to her room. She did not run this time, though. That felt like a major victory. Things started to thaw a little after that. She started spending short periods in the kitchen during the day if she thought we were busy. Sometimes I would be in the living room reading, and she would come out to make tea. We would exchange awkward hellos and talk about the weather. I learned that she was a freelance copy editor and worked on romance novels. She admitted that most of them were terrible, but they paid the bills. I told her about my job in IT and how half my day was telling people to restart their computers. She actually laughed out loud at that. It was a nice sound. My mom was overjoyed when Sienna finally joined us for dinner one Sunday. Mom made a roast chicken, and we sat at the dining table like a normal household. Sienna was still nervous and barely ate, but she was there. She listened to my mom talk about the library and nodded politely. After dinner, she helped clear the table. When she went back to her room, Mom whispered to me that she looked so thin and fragile. I agreed, but I felt like we were making progress. But then the letter arrived. About 3 months into her stay, I retrieved the mail. Usually she got nothing but bank statements. This time there was a thick envelope addressed to her with no return address. The handwriting on the front was jagged and aggressive. I put it on the kitchen counter with the rest of her mail. When she came out later to get it, I was in the living room. I heard her gasp. I looked over and saw her holding the letter, her hands shaking violently. She turned pale and looked like she was going to faint. I stood up and asked Sienna, "Are you okay?" She did not answer. She grabbed the letter and ran to her room, slamming the door. For the next 3 days she did not come out at all, not for food, not for water, not for anything. The food we left in the fridge went untouched. The whiteboard remained blank. My mom was frantic with worry. She wanted to call the police or open the door with the master key. I told her to wait. I said if we force the door we destroy the trust, but I was worried too. On the fourth night I knocked gently on her door. I said, "Sienna, I know you are in there and I know something is wrong. I said you do not have to open the door, but please just tell me you are alive." There was silence for a long time. Then I heard a small voice say, "I am here." I sat down on the floor outside her door. I said, "Listen, Mom is really worried. She wants to call for help. I am trying to stall her, but you have to give me something. Are you hurt?" She said no. I asked, "Was it the letter?" Silence again. Then she said, "He found me." My stomach dropped. I asked, "Who found you?" She said, "My father." I remembered the angry handwriting on the envelope. I asked, "Is he dangerous?" She said, "He is controlling. He wants me to come back." I asked, "Do you want to go back?" She said, "Never." I said, "Okay, then you are not going back. You are an adult and you are on the lease here. Nobody can make you leave unless you want to." She said, "You do not understand. He does not take no for an answer." I said, "Well, he is going to have to learn." I sat there for another hour just talking to her through the door. I told her about my dad and how he used to be strict but loving. I told her that she was safe here. Eventually, she unlocked the door. She looked terrible, like she had not slept in days. Her eyes were red and puffy. She stepped out and sat on the floor next to me. She told me everything. She grew up in a very wealthy but extremely restrictive household. Her father had her entire life planned out. Who she would marry, what she would study, where she would live. When she refused, he cut her off and threatened to ruin her. She had saved up money secretly for years and finally ran away. She had been moving from city to city trying to stay off his radar, but somehow he had tracked her down to our house. The letter said he was coming to get her. I felt a surge of anger that I had not expected. I looked at this terrified girl and realized she had been fighting a war all by herself. I said, "Listen to me, Sienna. If he shows up, you do not open the door. You let me handle it." She looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked, "Why would you do that?" I said, "Because you are my roommate and nobody messes with my household." She actually smiled a little at that. She slept on the couch that night because she did not want to be alone in her room. I stayed up in the living room with a baseball bat next to my chair just in case. Nothing happened that night. A week went by and the tension in the house was high. Every time a car drove by slowly, Sienna would flinch. My mom knew the basics of the situation and was fiercely protective. She started baking stress cookies by the dozen. Then on a rainy Saturday afternoon, a black SUV pulled into our driveway. I was in the garage working on my bike. Sienna was in the kitchen helping my mom. I saw a tall man in a suit get out of the car. He looked like a corporate shark, expensive suit, gray hair, angry face. He walked up to the front door and pounded on it. I wiped the grease off my hands and walked out of the garage. I intercepted him before my mom could open the door. I said, "Can I help you, sir?" He looked at me like I was an insect. He said, "I am here for my daughter Sienna, tell her to come out." I crossed my arms and stood between him and the door. I said, "Sienna lives here, but she does not want to see you. You need to leave." His face turned red. He said, "Listen to me, boy, move aside or I will call the police." I laughed and said, "Go ahead, call them. Tell them you are trespassing on private property and harassing a legal tenant. I think they would be very interested in that." He took a step toward me, trying to intimidate me. I am not a fighter, but I am 6 feet tall and I was running on pure adrenaline. I did not flinch. I said, "You have 5 seconds to get off my driveway before I call the cops myself." The front door opened behind me. It was Sienna. She looked terrified, but she stepped out onto the porch. My mom was right behind her, looking ready to fight with a rolling pin. The man saw her and his expression changed to a fake sweetness. He said, "Sienna, darling, pack your things. This has gone on long enough." Sienna took a deep breath. She grabbed my arm for support. She looked her father in the eye and said no. The man looked shocked. He said, "Excuse me." She said, "I am not coming with you. I live here now. I have a job. I have friends. I am happy. Leave me alone." The man snarled and stepped forward again. I stepped in front of Sienna, blocking his path completely. I said, "You heard the lady. Get lost." He looked at me and then at Sienna and then at the neighbors who were starting to watch. He realized he had lost control. He sneered and said, "You will regret this, you ungrateful brat." Then he turned around, got back in his SUV and drove away. We stood there on the porch watching him leave. Sienna let out a breath she must have been holding for years. Her knees buckled and I caught her before she hit the ground. She was sobbing, but they were tears of relief. My mom hugged both of us. We went inside and locked the door. That night we ordered the biggest pizza available in the city. We sat on the living room floor eating pizza and watching bad movies. Sienna laughed more that night than I had ever heard. The shadow that had been hanging over her seemed to lift. Over the next few months, the change in her was incredible. She stopped hiding in her room. She started decorating the house with little plants and artwork. She even joined a local book club. She was still quiet and shy, but she was no longer a ghost. We became close friends, really close friends. We would stay up late talking about everything and nothing. I realized that underneath the anxiety, she was brilliant and kind and incredibly strong. One evening, about a year after she moved in, I came home from work. She was in the kitchen cooking dinner. She had cut her hair short and was wearing a bright yellow dress. She looked happy. She turned to me and smiled and said, "Hey, I made your favorite tacos." I looked at her and realized I was in love with her. I did not say it then because I did not want to ruin the peace she had found, but I think she knew. A few weeks later, we were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. She leaned her head on my shoulder. She said, "Thank you for noticing me." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Everyone else just saw a quiet girl or a weirdo. You saw that I was hiding and you helped me come out." I put my arm around her. I said, "I am just glad you are here." She looked up at me and kissed me. It was soft and perfect. Fast forward to today. Sienna and I have been dating for 2 years. She still lives with us, but now she shares the master suite with me. My mom is thrilled and is already hinting about grandchildren. Sienna's father never came back. She is publishing her own novel next month. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and listen to the silence of the house. But now it is a peaceful silence. I look over at Sienna sleeping next to me and I am grateful. Grateful that my mom decided to rent out the room. Grateful that I noticed the girl who hid all day. And grateful that she finally felt safe enough to be found. Life is unexpected and beautiful. Sometimes the best things are hiding right behind a closed door. You just have to be patient enough to wait for them to open it. End of story.